Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game of me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. We're recording this on Monday morning and I've started my week sulking because the countdown, Kieran, it's just gone again. And yet the countdown was there when we did the quiz the other night. A full countdown right in front of me. And talking of quiz, Kieran, we had a lovely time. We gave away a couple of secrets that probably we shouldn't have done, but hopefully so far Chatham House rules seem to be followed, and congratulations to all that took part, even though they were wiped the floor with, if that's the right. So I love Company's House. I heart Company's House. I mean, he smashed it, Kieran. I think he was in the lead from question 2 and he stayed there till question 20, and in the end, just despite my attempts to create some artificial tension, Kieran, and persuade all our participants that they could still win, it was quite obvious they couldn't. That's the reason we started giving secrets away, to make sure people still get playing. As for Roy and Wart on the Bum, that pun alone team name deserved for him to come somewhere in the mid-20s. It's shameful. Nice though, Kieran. We had a good time.
It was. When you've got a listener who is so dedicated that he's photographed himself outside of Company's House holding our book, you know you've got a serious player. And fair play to him for winning.
Yeah, see, I was going to mention his actual name, but Ali went, no, you can't do that. It's there's all sorts of safeguarding issues just in case. So I'm sticking with I Heart Company's House. But we know who he is. He knows who he is. And congratulations to him. And thank you to all those people who joined in. We'll have another one at Christmas, of course. And we'll look forward to that. And we'll get more of you along for that one. It's Questions Day, Kieran. We have some cracking questions. We've also had some really good questions for Trevor Birch, who's coming in to talk to us this week, the head honcho of the EFL. And so if you've got any questions you want to ask Trevor Birch, we will happily put them to him, depending on the nature of the question, Kieran, I should point out.
Yes.
So it'd be the usual address for that. But Trevor's agreed to ask, I don't know whether I should say to him, this next question, Trevor, is from a listener called Steve Parrish. Or whether I should... Steve Parrish says, nah, you haven't got an independent regulator, nah. Which is his level of debate at the moment, I have to say. Let's start with questions, though, Kieran, because for once, we don't have to hijack the questions pod with news. I haven't asked how you are, Kieran. How are you? How are the you've been looking after caterpillars? How do they go?
Well, we now have 9 butterflies. Oh. And my granddaughters released them to the world on Saturday evening, but 2 of them refused. They were so happy. They were so happy in their little netting cage with free passion fruit and banana and kumquat, because that's the type of food you get from somebody that shops at Waitrose, of course.
You spoilt some butterflies, Kieran, you're saying?
I spoilt some butterflies to such an extent that they refused to go and see the outside world.
Possibly they were too overweight to lift themselves up, Kieran. They're just yes. Little butterfly tummy full of kumquat. I'm doing a Q&A with some Brighton fans tonight, Kieran. So I shall tell you how that goes when we meet again for our news pod. If I'm still here, of course, either under a lay-by or in prison. Either is possible, depending on the nature of the questions that I get. Our first question, Kieran, is a very interesting one. And when I first read it, I wasn't entirely sure where the football finance angle is, but there is definitely a football finance angle to it when I think about it. And it's from Nick Groom. And Nick says, my question relates to home and away kits and how it's determined which is to be worn. I've always understood that the final decision as to which strip a visiting team must wear is made by the referee on the basis of ensuring there's no potential for confusing which team is which. However, this decision is not always straightforward, it would seem, and sometimes a third kit is worn by the visiting team. We're often told that the reason for wearing that third or other alternative kit is to promote sales, but I assume the final decision must still lie with the referee. So the question is simply, does the referee always have complete control over which kit a visiting team must wear, or does money come into it as well? It's an interesting one, Kieran, because the Premier League rules on this are very short. It only really says that there must be sufficient contrast in both teams' kit that the referee the fans in the stadium and viewers watching at home on TV will be able to distinguish between the teams. And after that, it kind of lets it go. It used to be that socks, for example, had to be a different colour for the linesman so he could tell offside, but that was the excuse for changing the whole kit. But there are many occasions, Kieran, as we know, watching games, when there's absolutely no reason for the away team to wear any other kit other than their home kit.
That's right. At times it does seem to be on the basis of marketing. Yeah. Perhaps we've got a load of the away kit to sell, so let's wear it a bit more often, or the third kit. What normally happens is that you're aware of the ground to which you will be playing, and quite often you will see on a club website to say, this weekend we're going to Selhurst, we're going to the Emirates, we're going such and such, and we're going to be wearing the following kit, because some fans like to check out on that so that they can wear the matching kit to the team. And if it makes them feel slightly more closely bonded, fair play to them. But ultimately, the reason why we have different coloured kits is to distinguish the home from the away team. And I cannot speak on behalf of everybody that's colourblind. Speaking of somebody who is colourblind, sometimes you do wonder about the logic. The Premier League is helping in a way. It does actually now issue to clubs effectively a filter, so that therefore you can see how a colourblind person, and the vast majority of people who are colourblind are red-green colourblind, how a colourblind person would see those shirts. And I know that you get some more curmudgeonly commentators saying, well, why should we let a minority dictate? And it's the tyranny of the majority that concerns me, Kevin. The tyranny of the majority. 1 in 12 men are colourblind.
Yeah.
That's about 1 in 1,000 women because of different chromosomes. So if you're going to say, let's say you've got a 60,000 capacity stadium, half of which are men, half of which are women, so that's 30,000, 1 in 12 men, 2,500 blokes won't be able to distinguish a kit. So, if you're going to say to people, well, for the sake of tradition, 2,500 people are not going to be able to see the matches as they potentially could do, then fair play. But it is an element of accessibility in terms of vision. There is a small issue in terms of marketing, but ultimately it is the referee's decision. Again, sort of, if you know who your referee is going to be, and you'll know the referees are listed in advance, it might be a courtesy call from the club to say, this is the shirt we're planning to wear. I don't know whether that formally goes ahead, but there have been issues, I think, on occasion. I know when Brighton, for some reason, one season decided to have 3 kits, all of which were blue, which was a bit of a dumb thing to do. And we went to Leicester on a Tuesday night, and we had to wear Leicester's away kit because Leicester play in blue with white shorts, and it was such a shambles. I think it's a broader issue in terms of, because merchandise is now such a lucrative area for many clubs, that it's done from a fashion perspective, or athleisure, which is a new word in the vocabulary, and how that would fit. So therefore, pastel colours, softer colours become more prominent than sort of the standout colours we traditionally associate football clubs with, because it appeals to the leisure market to a greater extent, and you can sell more units. The downside of that is that you are going to get more colour clashes as a result.
You see that figure you say, Kieran, of 2,500 in a big crowd at an actual ground can't distinguish the teams. If you extrapolate that outwards, I don't think you can extrapolate anywhere other way than outwards, can you, Kieran?
I don't think so.
Can you intrapolate? I don't know. But we've got the Euros coming up. You're probably talking about 1 million men across the continent of Europe who are watching on TV who can't distinguish the 2 kits. I get more cross with people mucking about with international kits than I do with club kits, to be honest. I mean, that grey England kit, there's no excuse for England to have a grey kit in any way, shape or form. There's no tradition, there's no history that indicates that. I firmly believe at international level in particular, the away kit should be the reverse of the home kit. It's as simple as that. England should be wearing white shirts with blue shorts, and their away kit should be blue shirts with white shorts. You could argue for the red one, of course, traditionally.
What if you got red and white stripes? Because the inverse of that would be white and red stripes.
Well, there is that argument as well, of course. So you could just turn it inside out. I've long argued that every team's away kit should be white. That would save an awful lot of trouble.
Yeah. Well, that's what we've got in the NFL. Yeah. Have you seen the new Germany away kit?
I have not.
It's pink.
Oh, that's all right. That's nice. We're waiting for the pallet.
Sort of merging into, I don't know. Pascal Gross scored an 89th minute winner in it, so I'm buying it on that basis.
Oh, of course, that was your reason for mentioning it, was it? Okay. Also, in the old days, in the first 20 years of the Football League, from 1888 onwards, it was the home team that had to change if there was a clash, because for the most part, for most of the 20th century, the kit men would write to each other or phone each other up and say, "What's your away kit? Well, you better wear that then." Whereas in those days, of course, the carrier pigeon and the lettered weren't as reliable. So the home team had two kits, and whatever the away team turned up in, the home team would turn into their white kit. But I'd be interested to hear from our kit experts whether there is a direct correlation between Arsenal wearing their new away kit on the third day of the season, whether they need to or not, and shirt sales. We're legacy fans, Kieran. We would say it's got a bit out of hand. This next one, Kieran, from Glyn Merritt, is a really interesting question because it's a sort of financial figure you'd associate more with Sunday League teams than you would with Premier League teams or EFL teams. And Glyn's question is this: I was wondering which team in the English leagues has had to pay out the most in fines due to irregularities for on and off the field misdemeanours. Is this easy information for you to get, Kieran?
Yeah, there are some quite spectacular ones. So if we start with Manchester City, in 2014, they were fined 49 million by UEFA for FFP breaches. Now, that was reduced. They were then fined a further 30 million euro in 2020. Remember when they were initially given that 2-year ban by UEFA? That was subsequently reduced to a 10 million euro fine. So that's for financial misdemeanours. Sort of on the field misdemeanours, I give you West Ham United and the signing of Carlos Tevez and is it Javier Mascherano in 2006-07. Now, it turns out that those two players were subject to third-party ownership, and there were huge issues. And I think at one point, the FA was considering cancelling Tevez's contract, and famously, he scored the winning goal in the final match of the season, which led to West Ham United staying up and Sheffield United being relegated. I wonder who was in charge of West Ham in those days. That's for another pod.
That is for another pod. I can tell you who was in charge of Sheffield United, and that was Neil Warnock. I think I deserve a bravery medal because Match of the Day 2 sent me to Sheffield United for their penultimate home game of the season while all this West Ham stuff was going on. Why Neil Warnock thought I had any influence on West Ham's lawyers, I don't know, but he shouted at me quite a lot. Neil's not my fault. I don't work for them. Not everybody from London's a West Ham fan.
Absolutely. Sheffield United subsequently sued West Ham United for loss of income, and an out-of-court settlement took place. So I've been to Company's House this morning, any excuse, as we both know, and I found in Sheffield United's accounts in 2009 that they agreed an £18 million out-of-court settlement. That was net of legal costs, so it was probably about £40 million gross. So it would cost West Ham presumably £18 million net plus their own legal costs. So it was a very substantial settlement on top of the £5.5 million fine that was awarded against West Ham United by the football authorities themselves.
I don't know if Man City, well, the fans probably will do. I don't know if the owners will have read the papers across the weekends, but their eyes would have been burning. If your ears burn when someone's talking about you, their eyes would have been burning. They really are getting a kicking in the press this week, especially the broadsheet press. On a club's accounts, Kieran, their annual accounts, would it indicate fines that a club has given to players for irregularities? I mean, I know Harry Kane's not likely to be done for not paying his subs, as we used to be. But would, if a player was fined for being late for training, for example, if a player was fined for wearing headphones, which was something that Roy Hodgson used to do, would that be indicated in the accounts, or was that simply not enough of a substantial amount of money to even register on account?
That's right. It would be deemed to be immaterial, is the word that is formally used. So therefore, it would not be separately disclosed. I mean, quite often the fines are allocated via an internal fines committee, and that money is then spent at the end of the season either on sort of rewarding some of the academy players or things like that. So it's a complicated set of affairs, but you do see some very strange deductions in respect of players, because wasn't it Zlatan Ibrahimovic very famously highlighted the fact that Manchester United put a £1 deduction on his salary for 1 month when the club was staying at a hotel and he had a bottle of water or a bottle of orange juice or something like that. And he was underwhelmed by such an approach.
The Sunday League team I played for, we always knew that the captain was short on his Benidorm holiday fund come March or April, because the fines would start doubling. It's like, sure, I wasn't late. Not that we did much training anyway, but it's like, all right. He knows he was only captain because his mum had the biggest washing machine. This next question comes from somebody who I assume is a fairly close neighbour of mine, especially where I was brought up. It's from Nurul Islam. And Nurul asks, how much would it cost to run Colliers Wood FC in the Combined Counties League throughout the 10 months of the season?
Yes. Colliers Wood, for people not familiar, are in the southwest London of Merton. Is that
That's right? Yeah, in between Tooting and Wimbledon, basically.
Yeah. So they were relegated at the end of last season. They've dropped down in division as far as the combined cap. But when Nurul wrote the question, I suspect that they had not been relegated, because, as you know, there's quite a long list. It's difficult to say how much it would cost them, because, again, if you are below a certain size, there's no legal obligation to show detailed information about a business. I sort of found a club which I thought would be roughly similar size, which was Egham Town on Company's House, and they lost £30,000 in 2023. Yeah, that's a lot of money for a small club. Colliers Wood, they've got a 2,000 capacity stadium, so they're a semi-professional club at that level of football. So it is tough going. The club is effectively run by volunteers. You've got players who are picking up boot money. It's tough at grassroots to find sponsors. I know we were talking about another club at this level recently whose floodlights needed replacing. Yeah. I think they were trying to raise £17,000. They've only got around about 10% of that. So it's a tough job to keep things moving. And you've got to give a lot of applause to those volunteers who, out of affection for their local town or village or area, just put in those hard yards in order to allow the club to have a regular place to play and do amazing fundraising activities left, right and centre.
Well, as our friends at Clacton CCC told us a couple of seasons ago, trickle-down economics is all very well, Kieran, but not when it takes 50 years to trickle down from the Premier League to the grassroots level. And there's a sense of emergency amongst grassroots football, Kieran, everywhere you speak to, because they're simply not getting the funds they need. They're still part, as far as I'm concerned, they're every bit as part of the pyramid as Palace are, as Brighton are, as AFC Wimbledon are, as Mansfield are. But the short-sightedness of allowing all grassroots sport to disappear is just ludicrous in terms of future health, future sociability. Again, it's something I think we will be talking to Trevor Birch about this week, but I suspect there's more of an urgency from the EFL than the Premier League to do something about it.
Yeah, you just got to look at the England team that played on Friday night and how many of those players have played at EFL level and so on. Although it wasn't the greatest of performances, if they don't play like that, they'll be home from Europe quicker than Rishi Sunak was from Dunkirk.
From Normandy, but Dunkirk's more of an appropriate analogy, to be perfectly honest.
Sorry, it's Normandy, absolutely sorry.
Hi, I'm Steve Lamack, and every week I'm joined by Music Ally's Head of Insight, Stuart Dredge, on The Price of Music, the weekly podcast all about the money behind the music industry. In each episode, we discuss the very latest goings-on in the music business and dig into the finances behind the big stories.
So whether you're a music lover who just wants to know more about what really goes on in the industry, or you're an aspiring musician, manager or label owner who wants some inside knowledge on how Spotify's financial model really works, or what the future holds for independent live music venues, this is a show for you.
Subscribe to The Price of Music in your podcast app now. See you soon.
Andrew White has our next question, and this is a one we've discussed around this, Kieran, but I don't think we've ever talked about the actual specific nature of this question, because we've talked about how women's teams affect the FFP for the men's parent club, for want of a better word. But Andrew White's question is, when a club has a men's and women's team, do the women's team wages contribute to a club's FFP calculations?
No, under the way that FFP, now PSR, is formatted, any losses incurred by the women's team, so therefore that would include wages, are excluded from your £105 million limit if you are in the Premier League, or your £39 million limit as far as clubs in the Championship is concerned. We have spoken to people at various levels at various clubs, and I know that there is a perception, certainly from academy staff, that because academy costs are excluded from FFP, you might be given a budget of £6 million, which goes into the books through the academy, but you're only actually allowed to spend £2 million because that helps you in terms of FFP. So you do wonder at times whether that same principle applies to the women's team. And it does make things quite complicated, because let's say that you've got a physiotherapy department and it's costing £10 million a year. Well, if you say, well, we've got a men's team and a women's team, so therefore we're going to allocate that 50-50, which makes sense. Yeah. You can see why clubs are trying to perhaps shift costs across to the women's team, because it does give you extra flexibility in terms of FFP. I suspect Todd Bowley, if he's listening to this, is scribbling this down at present.
I suspect Todd Bowley isn't listening to this, Kieran.
That's true.
Especially if he heard the quiz last week, which was another of those, you should, I don't know if I should have said that moment. In the unlikely event, Kieran, that Palace, for example, just been promoted to the WSL, which is fantastic. In the unlikely event that the women's team were to open their own academy, would that then count towards the men's team's FFP?
Yes, because all of the costs relating to the women's team, so that would be the Pathway Academy and the first team, as far as the women's side of the game is concerned, all of those costs are exempt from FFP. And some of the clubs are losing a lot of money. I mean, Chelsea, I just mentioned Chelsea lost £4 million last year. Arsenal broke even, but they got I'm not saying it's a donation, but they got £6.4 million from the parent club. So the women's team game is complicated at present because it's still in a growth phase. It's still sort of, from a professionalism point of view, it's still relatively embryonic. And therefore you expect any company to be losing money in its initial phase. But we saw, as far as Arsenal were concerned, the ability to sell out the Emirates was pretty impressive, and there is an audience there. It's a different demographic, it's a different vibe to the men's team, and it should be treated as such. And I think one of the biggest fallacies on the women's side of the game is the constant comparison to the Premier League, that they're not the same. So stop making snidey comments by claiming that they are, and looking at some of the numbers.
I'm glad Andrew asked this question, Kieran, because it gives me the opportunity to answer a question that I was asked recently, and I sadly didn't know the answer, and I can't remember if I ever did know the answer. Someone said to me, where you've got a club like Durham who haven't got a parent men's club, are there separate FFP regulations in women's football for those clubs as well?
Well, I mean, there are separate FFP regulations in the sense that there's a wage cap of, I think it's 40% of revenue can be spent on wages. So that applies to all women's clubs. For the likes of Durham and Lewis, they simply have to try to break even in their own right.
Okay.
Whereas for WSL clubs who have a parent club who's part of the men's organisation or connected to the men's organisation, the incentive to lose money is slightly more relaxed, knowing that those losses don't count towards FFP. Chelsea did announce, I think we've probably covered this, they did announce that the women's team was now going to be set alongside the men's team with equal prominence, which I think is interesting. Though sort of the cynic in me, and we're not a cynical show, but the cynic in me says, is that actually more to do with a marketing exercise by Chelsea? Because I think they're trying to value the club at $200 million, the women's team, which seems a bit high to me.
We'll be discussing on Thursday, Kieran, in the news pod, a big story about FFP in the Premier League. So let's not get ahead of ourselves because it's way too big to talk about during the questions pod. Thomas O'Neill has a question about something that all football fans are convinced happens, despite the fact it's 100% illegal, 100% not allowed. And Thomas says, I wondered what the current rules on tapping up are, and have they changed recently? They have not. They are officially, Kieran, and I'm going to underline officially and put it in bold, officially tapping up is a big, big no-no. But Thomas says, my understanding of modern transfers is that discussions are often held between clubs and prospective agents of players to sound players out. I was also under the impression a player was only able to discuss terms with a club after an offer had been accepted. If so, how can these contradictory principles work together? The problem with the discussion of tapping up, Kieran, is that there are a lot of things that could be considered tapping up. If a manager after a Premier League match says, I'll tell you what, Jared Bowen is a good player, I'd love to see him, that's tapping up. There are all sorts of ways of letting a player know that you're interested in them, other than taking him to the old 1970s days where Brian Clough takes you to a motorway service station halfway up the M1 and gives you a brown paper bag full of Reddies, are, for the most part, long gone. It's an interesting one, Kieran, because as Thomas says, it does seem almost impossible to conduct any transfer without some level of pre-discussion.
Yes, I think it's a fair point made by Thomas. The rules are very, very clear. A player's registration is held by Club X. Then the only way that player can talk to another club with review to a potential transfer is if his existing employer gives permission. So therefore, there has to be a formal route. The buying club must approach the club where the player currently plays. They will then normally come to some form of tentative agreement with a ballpark figure for a fee, and then the quantum phrase, the selling club will talk to the player, say, look, you've got the opportunity to discuss. And that's fine, but we've said on many an occasion that footballers are not commodities. When I read the response of many fans on social media, well, it's not disturbing, but I think it's sort of, it shows that there is no loyalty from fans to players. We can make money out of you as a commodity, go. Whether that's good for your family, whether that's good for you, whether you, and I know of one player who was, for one of the better phrase, he was a home-loving lad. And he was transferred from where he grew up. He didn't particularly want to go. He never really settled down elsewhere. And then he came back to his hometown club for his past few years, and he was great again. But because he had been treated as a piece of inventory, his career, to a certain extent, was blighted. And it was made very clear. In terms of informal tapping up, it does work in exactly how Thomas had suggested, in the sense that, to a certain extent, it's pointless. Would you like to go to Club X? Well, I've never really fancied it. Don't like the manager, don't like the style of play. So what will happen is that the buying club will normally use an agent, because they don't want to be seen as to do this directly themselves, who will contact the agent of the selling club, and they'll say, look, if we put in a bid, would he be interested? And if so, would this amount of money per week be roughly acceptable? And then you'll either get a yes or no, because there's no point putting in a bid for a player if the player said, well, actually, I love playing for Palace. I played for Palace all my life. Why would I want to go? So there is an informal route. I think what is of greater concern is that sort of works at the professional level. At a younger level, there are far more insidious things taking place. The agents will approach the parents of a club and say, of a promising child. Liverpool, for example, they were given a £100,000 fine for approaching the parents of a 13-year-old who was registered at Stoke, going through not the right routes and so on. I'm aware of one very high-profile player who people identified as being very talented from a very young age, and again, the parents were targeted. I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but the parents are saying, look, we can't pay your son because Premier League rules, it's child trafficking to a certain extent. However, our kit manufacturer has a couple of vacancies at present. Would you be interested in these jobs? And Dad and Mum said, well, we're not really qualified for that. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. Yeah, we'll sort that out. And hey presto, young Johnny or young David or whatever his name is, he ends up signing, potentially goes on to first team success and so on. So it does take place. It's not morally or ethically right, but this is a football finance show, and these children are seen as walking pots of money in terms of their potential value to a club, either through being sold a few years later or getting into the first team, and therefore saving the club tens of millions, if not more, in terms of recruiting a player of equal calibre.
I know, Kieran, and I presume it's still the case, because it was only a couple of years ago I spoke to a couple of managers, ex-managers, who said that they always hated international tournaments because they saw that as a potential opportunity for their players to be tapped up. As an example, say, Adam Wharton is out with the England team for a month, then in days gone by, the England manager would be worried that somebody high profile from another big team might spend that month saying to him, you'd love it. You'd love it up here. I know you're doing well at Paris, but so there's all sorts of things that we probably wouldn't think of first time. But there's many opportunities to get access to a player that managers are not happy about. Having said that, the same manager would probably be doing exactly the same thing in a different circumstance. So there's very few people untainted in the game of football, unfortunately, Kieran, aren't there?
Yeah, and it's not just football.
Yeah,
all I can say from personal point of view, I don't think I've ever formally applied for a job apart from the first one I took up. Every other one was, you happy? You ever thought about coming, fancy coming out with us for a meal? And you sort of, you pick up on vibes and you say, oh yeah, okay, that does sound interesting. And then of course you do sound people out because you don't want to go and move to some, I turned down a job which was worth a lot more money simply because I realised that for me, it sounds really trite. I'm not motivated by money. Money doesn't interest me. As long as I can go and watch football and see the odd band, I'm not interested in possession. My car's 12 years old and wear scruffy old t-shirts. So it's always been about what are the people like and what's the job. And I guess I'm in a fortunate position to do that. So there are networks. You must know about, in the world of entertainment, about people going from one venue to another or one broadcaster to another, and it's all done on the basis of having a chat with someone before doing things the formal way.
Yeah. Well, in our industry, it's more likely that you can't have person A to host your series unless you take these other two acts on our books to be in it as well. But there's all sorts of things on. Bear in mind, Kieran, you're not motivated by money, but you do have a very expensive football kit habit. You need to fund that. Also, I'm seriously, genuinely think the only reason you were invited to the Royal Garden Party was that the King wanted to tap you up. There needs to be a royal football finance expert, surely, you'd think. Now, you mentioned the phrase overtaken by events, Kieran, and our next question from Tim Fitzgerald, I think, has been overtaken by events somewhat, but I'm still happy to ask it because I'm intrigued what the answer is, because I think it won't just be happening at Ipswich Town. Tim is an Ipswich fan. And Tim says, I have a question, or more of a complaint, about the change from iFollow to Town TV, Ipswich Town's in-house streaming service. I'm an international viewer based in France and have subscribed to iFollow for years. I even had to buy 2 subscriptions one year because they wouldn't let you listen to the commentary and watch the game at the same time. The season before last, iFollow cost me £140, for which I got to watch most of the games. Some were on Sky, some not streamed, but I paid for that too. Last season, however, Town TV started with a subscription price of £19.99 per month, which is basically £240 a year, an increase of 71%. As the club seemed to be trying to do the right thing in general, and I know you've spoken to Mark Ashton on a couple of occasions, I wondered if it was something that you might raise awareness of. The cost of living crisis is a global problem, and 70% increases are a bit hard to swallow. He's probably in a better mood now, Tim, I would have thought, this summer. But it's if that's right, Kieran, a 71% increase is big.
It is what you're getting for that £240, which... how much does it cost for a TV license? What, 140 quid?
Fair point, I suppose, yeah.
Does seem steep. It also seems quite steep when compared to some of the Premier League clubs who are sort of in-house TV channels. I think there is a perception now at some clubs that if they've got what they consider to be a dedicated overseas fan base, the fans that are going to the matches at Portman Road or wherever the team is playing are paying so much for a season ticket. This is still substantially lower than paying for a season ticket. So this is what we'll offer you. As a price point, though, it's more expensive than Amazon Prime. It's more expensive than Netflix. It's more expensive than Apple TV or Paramount Plus or any of the main streaming channels. And I appreciate it's a dedicated niche offering, but again, you're not getting 365 days worth of what you would call proper entertainment from it. So on the face of it, it does seem a very high price. But people can only vote with their feet.
Yeah.
And if people continue to subscribe, then the clubs aren't going to stop trying to charge this amount of money.
Well, what happens from next season onward, Kieran, with the new Sky deal with the EFL, when they're pretty much promising that if you're a championship club, there will be virtually no games that you can't see live on some platform on Sky. All the Carabao Cup games are going to be live behind the red button. Will there be any need for clubs to offer any sort of streaming service at all in future?
Well, I guess this has been one of the things we'll be discussing with Trevor on later in the week. But I think iFollow is effectively withered away.
Right.
It served a purpose during COVID. Yeah. And I think it was welcomed by fans, and it gave fans the opportunity to financially contribute towards the club that they love. And then there are some clubs who have huge followings for whom it was still worth continuing with. We know our friend Andy Holt was quite vociferous in his opposition because he felt it was costing him money because there were fewer away fans coming to matches. So it's a big and complex area where, like all decisions, there will always be winners and there will always be losers.
Right, if it's a big and complex area, Kieran, you better ask Trevor Birch that question when we speak to him. Two questions left, Kieran. The first one, we talked about women's football having separate FFP rules. This question from Simon Burrows, it's one of those questions I can't believe I haven't asked you this question myself before, because it seems such, no disrespect to Simon, because it obviously isn't an obvious question because I didn't think of it, but it seems a very obvious question once you see it written down. And Simon actually says, I suspect you're probably going to have a few questions like this, but with so many players being paid lucrative contracts in Saudi Arabia, I did wonder, do they not have any form of FFP rules over there? I suspect this is a short one-word answer, Kieran, but...
It is, yes. They don't have FFP. And then I think we need to sort of rewind to a certain extent. Why was FFP introduced? It was because initially there was a feeling at UEFA that some clubs were being allowed to lose as much money as their owners were prepared to subsidise the clubs by. And that was having an impact upon the existing royalty in terms of the clubs that are expected to be at the top table in European competition. Then that was extended to the Premier League because Premier League clubs were also losing money, and they've introduced FFP, and hey, presto, they're continuing to lose money. There's a different ethos. So it was a decision which was made by the clubs themselves. Now, if we take a look at the Saudi Pro League, I think there's 12 teams, of which 4 teams are owned by PIF. Now, if PIF doesn't want FFP, the chances are you ain't going to get a rule change going through. The losses being incurred by Saudi Pro League clubs, we don't know those losses. We don't, certainly as far as attendances are concerned, attendances are modest. Jordan Henderson was playing in front of 600-700 people at times when he moved, but you are being paid a large amount of money for the rights to play there. And I've always said it's a profession like any other. If we were offered a live show in Riyadh for £100,000, we would take it. And if you're listening,
do you know what? I'd be open to negotiation. I'd go a little lower than that, Kieran. I'd still go.
Oh, really?
Yeah, not much lower than that, but I'd think about it. Can I ask you this question, Kieran, because it interests me. Is there any compulsion for Saudi Arabian football clubs to lay their accounts open to anyone? Would you be able to access them the same way you can for clubs here and most clubs in Europe?
No, it's broadly the same as MLS in the United States, in the sense that private companies are very private. Because I was approached by somebody to do the price of NFL.
Oh, wow.
And I said, well, I can't do that because I won't be able to comment upon the finances of of individual clubs. And the reason for that is that apart from the Green Bay Packers, who are a public company, all the other companies or other franchises are private, and therefore there's no indication as to whether they're profitable or loss-making. For all the rights and wrongs that we have in this country, Companies House, and I know it's an in-joke as far as the show is concerned, does offer a very, very valuable service for anybody that wants to go through that analytical route. And it does shine a light on some of the things. We wouldn't have known, for example, the out-of-court settlement between West Ham and Sheffield United, which was a private agreement, unless we'd gone to Companies House. It's the same with regards to Graham Potter's compensation payment from Chelsea to Brighton and so on.
I was worried that we were going to get through a whole pod without you mentioning Graham Potter going to Chelsea, Kieran. You managed it. I'm sad you turned down the price of NFL, Kieran, because I would love to tune in to hear Will Smith say, Will Smith, joined by Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire, to look at the money behind the game that's on 3 months. I wonder who producer guy would have got in to be me in America. It was probably Ricky Gervais. Ricky Gervais and you, that'd be good for a couple of weeks, wouldn't it? Talking of MLS, Shelton Brown has our final question, and it's kind of related to the one we've just answered, but I think it's a really interesting one. And Shelton says, do you see the massive recent investment in players like Messi paying off for the MLS? And do you think it would give more financial incentives to other world-class players to choose the United States at some point in their careers? If yes, how long does that sort of thing take? Because I would wonder if the PIF, the Saudi Arabian football, would be slightly concerned about the MLS starting to offer similar amounts of money. Because I guess from a PR point of view that there are a lot of footballers who would probably decide to go to America rather than Saudi Arabia. You see what happened to Jordan Henderson. I wonder if agents would be more inclined to go down that route if the money was in any way similar.
If the money was similar, I'm sure it would be a significant consideration. MLS does have very strict cost control rules, and we often talk about other sports. And here, we mentioned the WSL, but also rugby, cricket. That they've all been squeezed out in terms of accessing eyeballs by the success of the Premier League. The problem that MLS have is that you've got NFL, NBA, NHL, MLB. You've got the four senior franchise sports in the United States, and I think a new TV deal is about to be signed with the NFL, and the numbers involved knock the Premier League into a cocked hat, if there is such a thing.
Yeah.
And part of the reason for that is that they are perfect products for advertisers, because the problem that we have with football through the eyes of a marketeer, through an advertiser, is that you've got 45 minutes with no adverts. That's outrageous.
Yeah.
Whereas if you look at the American franchise sports, they've got so many breaks that you can make an absolute fortune from selling those advertising slots. I mean, this was one of the reasons why Florentino Perez wanted football to be divided into 4 quarters, because all of a sudden you've now got 3 15-minute breaks during the course of a match, which means that you triple the amount of advertising income generated by the broadcaster. So MLS has a problem is in that it's squeezed, because NBC, ABC, all the American big broadcasters, they want the things which generate the highest ratings, and that's not going to be football for a very long time. We know that there are issues in terms of the physical damage that some of those American sports do, and I know that some parents, they tend to be parents of a certain type, say, we want our children to be playing soccer rather than NFL because the impact on brain damage and so on. If you do play NFL, it's such a physical sport. But I suspect it's going to take at least 2 generations to come through.
If you think football, soccer in America is squeezed, with that huge potential Central and South American audience that they have there, imagine how much more squeezed cricket's going to be, Kieran. I mean, it's as you say, for television purposes, cricket's a perfect game. You've got a lot of advertising opportunities there. But I was watching the India-Pakistan game. I can't think of many places in the world where there'd be so many empty seats for an India-Pakistan game. the whole swathes of it. And it's just, I understand cricket, like any sport, needs to expand its horizons, but sometimes you just go, actually, we're doing all right where we are, and it's just really annoying me. It might be subconsciously my excuse because I got furious watching Australia smash us the other night, but it just seems an odd decision to me, Kieran, commercially and otherwise. I'm sure there will be American cricket fans who will be only too happy to tell me that I'm wrong. Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page, including Jackson Carney, who says Toonami New Orleans checking in. I did toy with the idea of trying to do a southern state accent crossed with a Geordie accent there, Kieran, but I thought only trouble would ensue if I tried to do that. If Jackson wants to give us a... No, it wouldn't have sounded like that, Finley.
Is Kevin the postman?
Kevin's got his shorts on?
It could be -12 in January. Kevin's got his shorts on.
And Kevin might be bringing one of your butterflies back that was too heavy to flutter off a nearby mulberry bush. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod as well and join people like Jackson all over the world, that'd be very kind of you. It will get you access to our chat community and our regular quizzes. And you can do that by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. Don't forget we're interviewing EFL Chief Executive Trevor Birch this week. So if you've got questions for him, it's the same address, questions@priceoffootball.com. Also, don't forget you can follow us on Twitter and you can find us on YouTube. And if you'd like to buy our book, which is coming out in paperback soon, you can find details on the same website, priceoffootball.com. We'll be back on Thursday with a news pod, including that big story about FFP in the Premier League. In the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Thank you very much, Jackson, for joining our merry band of Patreons, especially from New Orleans. Yeah. That's such a cool place, my word.
It looks like it. I've never been, but it always looks really cool on James Bond films, which is not necessarily the way you should check out a place, but it always does.
Yes, I'm teaching in Charlotte.
Oh wow!
Soon.
Wow!
I get asked to do strange gigs, but I don't think that's as cool as New Orleans.
Oh, it's a place of great history. So.
Oh right, cool. So thank you to all the patrons. That's one way of supporting the show. It allows you to listen to the show without the adverts. The adverts contribute, of course. If you want to support the show in another way, why not give us a review? Helps us in the charts, helps us with algorithms, keeps producer Guy happy. And you can say whatever you want. It makes no difference to our position in the charts. You could even say you'd rather have the show presented by Ricky Gervais and Steve Parish. I think that would be a very weird combination. And it wouldn't bother me or Kevin.
Wow, you'd have to widen the doors to get the egos in for that one. Wow. And well done, us, Kieran. We'll save the childish Charlotte jokes for when you come back. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.